Welcome back to Taiwan Outlook. Join us today is Legislator Bi-khim Hsiao from the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. Bi-khim, you being a member of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Legislature Yuan, but as we know that there are many disagreements inside the committee as to how to conduct Taiwan's diplomacy. Does that affect Taiwan's, foreign relations and foreign policies in general?
Well, first I have to say that it's very sad, but unfortunately our committee is one of the least popular committees in the legislature. Yeah. It's on the one hand, foreign policy for Taiwan, diplomacy is a very difficult task. Right. On the other hand, it's not an area where, as legislators, as politicians, we get direct response from the public. So that's first of all. And secondly, diplomacy has to do with promoting our country. And I think the greatest difficulty that we've faced domestically has been differences in identity in Taiwan. There are people who recognize different names for our country, and there are people who identify themselves differently. Some people like to say they're Chinese, and some people believe they're Taiwanese. And so there are different identities in Taiwan. And this is manifested in sometimes confrontational politics in the Legislative Yuan, which is really unfortunate, but it's part of our history, and it's something we must go through as a country. In terms of diplomacy, I think the greatest controversies come usually regarding issues like the name of our country. Yeah. For example, we recently passed a free trade agreement with Nicaragua, a free trade agreement between the Republic of China, parentheses, Taiwan, and Nicaragua. Now, there are some people who insisted that the parentheses Taiwan should not be there, while there were others, like me personally, I believe that Taiwan should be promoted. Because I think the name Republic of China sometimes is confused with the People's Republic of China, and that the people in countries that support Taiwan should know that we are from Taiwan, not from China. So this has been a point of dispute. There have been other areas of dispute. For example, recently we've been negotiating the new passport regulations, the passport law. And the existing regulations require that people who gain citizenship from the People's Republic of China and obtain the passport of the People's Republic of China must renounce their passport, their Taiwan passport, and their Taiwan passport will not be renewed. In other words, we do not recognize a dual citizenship of the ROC and the People's Republic of China. Now, this is in the existing cross-straits People's Regulation, but when it comes to passport regulations, it means that if you choose to obtain a PRC, a Chinese passport, your Taiwan passport will not be renewed. Now, this has been in our existing regulations. But there are some people in our committee who feel that dual citizenship should be allowed, that we should not discourage Taiwanese business people, for example, from obtaining a Chinese passport. Whereas there are others like me who firmly believe that given the circumstances across the Taiwan Strait and the hostility, especially the military threat, that we should maintain a single citizenship position with regards to the People's Republic of China. I'm very open to people having citizenship of other countries. There are, for example, many Vietnamese nationals living in Taiwan, very many Taiwanese Americans who have American passports and other passports. I'm open to that because these countries are not hostile towards Taiwan. So these are some of the issues that are heated debates, where you see some confrontations within the Legislative Yuan. And these differences, of course, will affect how we are represented internationally. I think sometimes our committee, relative to some other committees, because there are not so many domestic votes and interests involved, our committee isn't as confrontational as others. But still, we'd like to have a more unified position of our country when we are facing such a stronger challenge from China. It would be useful if we are in a greater unified position, if there is greater solidarity within Taiwan, I think that would help to strengthen our government's position when confronting China internationally.
Are these controversial issues divided along the partisan lines in general?
Yes, it's very much partisan. Yes.
But if when it comes to issues such as establishing diplomatic ties or even joining many international organizations, this partisan politics still work?
See, usually I think there is bipartisan support for establishing diplomatic ties, and usually there's also support for joining international organizations like the World Health Organization. Yeah. Recently, the legislature passed, not just in the committee, but in the plenary session, we passed a resolution, a bipartisan resolution supporting our government's efforts to gain membership in the World Health Organization.
In what name?
Huh?
In what name? In Taiwan? In the name of Taiwan? Or?
Well, the name hasn't been specified in this particular resolution, but we refer to ourselves as our country.
Oh, I see.
And that helps to avoid some of the disputes that might arise internally. But as long as there is a common agenda that we can all agree across party lines, that we want to join the World Health Organization, we want to participate, I think that point is very clear, and this resolution is important too when we're dealing with China, because China has become much more skillful at using divide and conquer tactics, being very friendly towards certain people in Taiwan while really suppressing the activity space of other people. We really need to try to find common ground within Taiwan so that the divide and conquer tactic of China will not succeed.
Bi-khim used to work in the government, the executive branch in the president's office, and now you are a member of the Legislator Yuan. What do you think that the role of the Legislator Yuan in the process of foreign policy making and in conducting of diplomacy?
Well, I have to admit there are not many actual laws in terms of legislation that comes through our committee. Other committees like Economic Affairs and Financial Affairs committees have a lot more in terms of real lawmaking. The Foreign Affairs Committee does more actual international contact. And in light of Taiwan's very difficult circumstances, where sometimes state-to-state or government-to-government relations are constrained, when it's much more difficult for our executive officials to travel. Sometimes it is useful that members of parliament have greater flexibility and freedom to travel. So, for example, I've been invited to many international conferences and events. I travel to many countries where it would be much more difficult for a senior official from the executive branch to attend. So parliamentarians have this kind of flexibility, and I think we should utilize that flexibility more actively. And I encourage this also among my colleagues from the opposition parties. For example, I'm very involved in an international political party organization, Liberal International, an organization of liberal political parties. The opposition party, the Kuomintang Party, is involved in an international conservative network of political parties called the IDU. I encourage them to become more active in this conservative network of political parties, so that in addition to government relations, we also have parliamentary relations. We also have political party relations that can help to compensate for the lack of official diplomatic ties. It provides another platform for us to engage with the international community.
But in terms of parliamentary diplomacy, some countries have the so-called parliamentary system. So those people in the parliament are also members of the government.
Yes.
So does that help in terms of improving Taiwan's ties with those countries?
Oh, yes. For countries with a parliamentary system, very often we engage with our friends, and the next moment, there's an election and they have a senior government portfolio. So this kind of parliamentary interaction, I think, has been very valuable for Taiwan. For countries especially for countries that don't recognize Taiwan diplomatically, especially European countries and other Asian countries, because there's a lack of formal diplomatic ties. It's usually the parliamentarians that are much more vocal in supporting Taiwan. They're In the European Parliament, for example, there have been a number of resolutions supporting Taiwan's involvement in the World Health Organization. They've also raised resolutions in various different countries supporting visas and travel of our senior officials. They've also condemned China's threat to use military force and the so-called anti-secession law. So, you know, the fact that other parliamentarians have more flexibility to speak up, especially those in opposition parties, but even those in government parties, can be more vocal than their executive officials when it comes to supporting Taiwan. But I have to say that Chinese pressure is really becoming stronger and stronger. They've tried to use the multinationals, the business communities, and other ways to blackmail our parliamentarian friends. It's really become much more difficult, but we are comforted by the fact that there are still many friends out there who have a sense of justice. It's very often those maintaining principles and ideals have to suffer from harsh realities. They are punished and China retaliates against them. But the fact that there are still many friends out there who uphold the basic principles of, for example, universal participation in international organizations, who uphold the principles of supporting democratic countries in criticizing the violations of human rights. There's still people out there who are very outspoken, and we're fortunate to have these friends. And I think it's important for us as parliamentarians to maintain those relations so that they can have a better understanding of Taiwan.
You mentioned Liberal International. You have been a very active member in that international organization. As a matter of fact, you are vice president of the Liberal International. Could you tell us your party, ruling party, Democratic Progressive Party's relations with that international organization?
Well, we've been involved in Liberal International for many years. Liberal International is an organization of political parties with a liberal orientation. And as such, these liberal parties have been much more outspoken on individual liberties, human rights, and liberalism in terms of trade. And so these are areas where the DPP also shares the values. Of course, the only question we have is in terms of trade with China, which is also a unique situation. But with the rest of the world, we share the values, and so we've been very active in this organization. Many of the political parties that are in Liberal International have also been very principled and outspoken in supporting democracy in Taiwan. Unfortunately, recently, because Liberal International as an organization is also affiliated with the Yuan ECOSOC NGO committee as an NGO. But because recently a colleague from Taiwan spoke as an LI representative in the UN advocating Taiwan's health rights and participation in the World Health Organization. Now, China could not tolerate the 2 minutes spoken in the United Nations and has now retaliated against Liberal International.
What did it do?
They recently, in May, launched a vote to disaffiliate Liberal International on grounds that China has accused Liberal International of violating UN regulations. China has also accused the Secretariat for allowing someone with a Taiwan passport access to the United Nations. China had demanded that Liberal International promise they will never allow another Taiwanese to attend any LI delegations in the future. Liberal International, upholding their principles, and given that Taiwan is a formal member of this organization, they have no grounds of excluding Taiwan. So they refuse to come to this type of agreement with China. As such, China has retaliated and launched a vote for ECOSOC to disaffiliate Liberal International. This is very unfortunate. I think on the one hand, it reflects the trend that China is retaliating. They're not only suppressing Taiwan, but they are retaliating and suppressing all the friends that support Taiwan. So this is hostility not only towards us, it's also towards anybody who's outspoken or who is supporting Taiwan. So many of our friends will suffer as a consequence. Liberal International has suffered disaffiliation from the United Nations. And I believe that China will be using similar mechanisms to blackmail and to suppress other friends of Taiwan. Now, that is one alarming trend. The second very alarming trend is that China's tactics, suppression tactics, are now extending beyond governmental organizations.
So NGOs
in the past, it was a sovereignty issue. Now, it's even NGOs. They are forcing NGOs to also disconnect themselves from Taiwan. And this is a very alarming trend. Recently, I was invited to an international conference, a non-governmental international conference. And China demanded that this conference list me as part of China. I found that very offensive, and I said I would not go if I'm listed as a Chinese. I think it's degrading for Taiwan. It would be unjust to the people who voted for me. It's degrading to me personally as well. But China is using these means to keep us from even attending non-governmental organizations and conferences like this. So I think this is a very, very alarming trend. In the past, aside from government and sovereignty-related issues, we've had a lot of room in the NGOs. But apparently China is strengthening their muscles in these areas and really flexing their muscles and really suppressing Taiwan, even on the NGO front.
You've been involved in politics for more than a decade or so. So when we come back, we'll talk about your personal experience of being a politician in Taiwan, especially as a female politician in Taiwan. So stay with us. We'll be back in a few moments.